Thanks for joining this second webinar in our KeyServer Fundamentals course. This one is on software usage and entitlement tracking. In the last Fundamentals webinar, we talked about network structure and hardware asset management because a well-organized network is an important prerequisite for effectively tracking software usage and managing software licenses. Today, we're going to take that organization a step further and talk about what you need to know to find, define, track usage, and manage compliance for software entitlements using audit data from the computers on your network, our built-in product recognition service. We can also talk about building manual product definitions as needed, purchase logging, and policies for observing, managing, or denying launch within the KeyServer. So this is our quick outline here. First step, we're going to talk about the difference between a program and a product within the KeyServer, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into the programs as well as the products windows and details windows. Then we'll go into the product recognition service, what it is, how it works in relationship to your local KeyServer, and what you can do to make use of that. We'll talk about manual products as well. And then we'll jump into the audit products report and talk about programs a little bit deeper. And then we'll jump into policies within your KeyServer, again, for usage tracking, software management, and some additional purposes you might also have for creating policies. We'll talk a little bit about purchase records as well. We're not going to dig too deeply into purchases today. It's an optional module that many of our users are still making their way towards using. We'll talk about how policies and purchases fit together and some of the advantages of using purchases, but won't go too deeply into all the details there. And then we'll dig a little bit into usage reports related to some of the other topics that we've talked about today. Okay, so looking at KeyServer in the last, or key configure here, in the last talk, we dived pretty deep into the computers window, talked about divisions, computer networks. Now, the first thing we want to talk about today is the programs window. And the way you get to the programs window is under the window menu up top. There is an option for programs, and that will pop up this window here. So the first thing to talk about when we're bringing up programs is the difference within KeyServer between a program and a product. They're obviously very closely related. The key difference is that a program is an executable file stored on a hard drive of a computer. A product is a little bit more abstract. It has to do with what you're entitled to use from the publisher's point of view. So a product is what you've purchased, and it might include multiple different programs. And if we look at the products window, we can see these sometimes will include one program if a product is an individual program, but often, as in cases such as Adobe Creative Cloud or Microsoft Office, what you're going to see is that a product is a collection of programs. So if we look at a Creative Suite, for example, we'll see within the product details window a list of programs. So coming back to this programs window, similar to the other windows within KeyServer, you can see the right side contains individual instances of programs. On the left side, various ways of categorizing or filtering or organizing that information. Once again, we can customize columns, run reports with a right click in the top column. And if we right click in the main window here, we could do some additional sorting and running reports as well. You'll notice there's a lot of sort of jumbled names here. Currently we have applications, utilities, and ignored selected. So we're seeing a complete list of every executable file on every computer in the network. That's what filtering folders, and search window is for Control or Command F, depending on your OS. Will bring up a search menu. Be specific here because, again, usually a string, you may run into a lot of instances and have to sort through. So try to be pretty specific, and you can drill down to what you're looking for through the search. There's a lot of pre-built filters here that can be used for filtering down. Interesting is one that if we go into this filter, we can see that this has a lot of details as to what this is going into to determine what is considered an interesting program, including operating system and file path and things like that. So one thing to consider or bring up here is what is the difference between this program's window and a program audit report? Because we can run up to this and run a report on programs and get a view that looks similar to this. Well, in the programs window, we're seeing a single instance of every program that this KeyServer has ever discovered on a computer. So this window is add only. KeyServer is not going to automatically delete anything from here. So it's a constantly growing list of all the programs discovered on the computers on your network. Whereas an audit report is kind of a snapshot in time of all the programs on all the computers, including a tally of the number of instances. So we'll run an audit report here in a minute, and I'll show you what I mean. But an audit is how many of each of these programs exist at a given point in time on all the computers on the network. This programs window is more of a library of previously discovered programs. So here's some Adobe. We'll take Adobe InDesign 2017. If we open this up, then we can see this is an individual program. It's included in a single product called Adobe Creative Cloud. And there are many different versions or variants of this program over a period of time. And we can see each of those variants. We can even drill down deeper if we open this up and see very, very specific version information. From within this window, we can also click to see the variant or version installs. So I can click here and see exactly which computers have this very specific version of Adobe InDesign. Okay, so coming back here, well, we'll have a quick look here at the rest of this window, just some of the other details that we can discover. Again, the top right includes additional panes that aren't necessarily visible right out of the gate. But what we can see is any policies that this program is associated with. Now, policies are written based on products. So again, what we can tell from here is that there isn't a policy written that covers the Adobe Creative versions that this program was included as a part of, since this program is not covered by any policy. You can create custom messages. So if there is a specific message you want to provide to end users upon launch or attempted launch of a specific program, you can set up a custom message. And so this is the program details window for in this case, Adobe InDesign, CS4. And coming back here to the programs window, we'll have a look up top. There is this status section that shows application, utility, or ignored. Pretty self-explanatory here. What this means, application means that this raw executable file is a part of, is an application on the computer. So it may be a part of a product. It is a software tool that you might open up and use, as opposed to a utility, which is a process that may run in the background, such as a monitoring tool, or even an installer might be considered a utility. And then ignored tends to be something that's operating system level, or something that you have decided you want to ignore within the KeyServer. And you can drag and drop between these. So I could take a copy or a version of program and drag it right into that ignored to essentially tell the key server you don't want to see it in audit reports. You don't want to be informed of usage, and just ignore that altogether. And I think that covers everything that we wanted to talk about out of the gate here in the programs window. Again, the difference between a program and a product, and I'll go ahead and leave the programs window up, is that a program is a raw executable and a product is what you purchase from a publisher. Very often, they're essentially one and the same. If you purchase a single program, then your product details, which we'll go into, is just going to have a single program within it. Our product recognition service is essentially a library of all of the products that we are aware of and have created definitions for. We keep that up to date and try to add to it, certainly based on user requests. And a little bit of background here: in versions of KeyServer prior to 7.0, this products feature didn't exist at all. PRS wasn't here, products wasn't here at all. And what was being managed at that time were programs. So with the introduction of products and the product recognition service, initially, as a part of the upgrade from 6 to 7, this 6.x logged product was created. And essentially what that was is a collection of all the programs you had previously been tracking in KeyServer 6.x, was now thrown into a logged product so that you could easily find and access them in your 7.0 version of KeyServer. So that isn't a real product. It's sort of a manually created product, a synthetic product, I guess, that is a collection of various different programs that aren't necessarily tied together in the form of a traditional product. So one thing you may want to consider doing, if that product does exist in your KeyServer, is to go into it, see what's there, and possibly, depending on how much is there, most likely it's very old programs you may or may not want to track usage of, but you may want to reach out to us if it seems like it's relatively full and complex. But the goal is to kind of clean that product out and work off of the product definitions that have been set up and created by the product recognition service as much as possible. Now, the way you can tell the difference within KeyServer between a manually created product and one that has been imported from our product recognition service is the color of the icon. You should be able to see that there's this 7-zip and this 3D capture have a slightly lighter colored icon versus the ones down below here that are darker color. The darker ones are the ones that have been imported, and the lighter ones are the manually created products. When programs are discovered on the computers on your network and pushed up to the KeyServer from the client, the KeyServer creates this list of programs that have been discovered in audits of those computers. Based on a schedule, which is typically every night in the middle of the night, your local KeyServer will communicate with our product recognition service and anonymously send up that list of programs. Our PRS will compare that list of raw program data with our library of product definitions and then push down back to your KeyServer an imported list of product definitions. So rather than storing every single product definition on your local KeyServer, you're just getting a list of products that correspond to the programs that have been sent up. This doesn't, the fact that a program or a product rather appears in this list doesn't necessarily mean that that product is owned and installed on your network. It just means that it is a definition that corresponds to the programs that are installed on your network. In other words, if you see Photoshop is installed on your network and Photoshop gets sent up to PRS, PRS is going to send down the Photoshop product as well as the Creative Cloud product and any other Adobe products that include that version of Photoshop. So this product list tends to be more extensive than what's actually installed, but not a complete list of everything in the PRS. So that's the automatic process that's set up on a schedule. And if you want to see what that looks like under the config menu, general settings, you can see that this KeyServer is set up to contact PRS daily at 12 a.m. And that checkbox is selected, which means that is turned on. So each night at midnight, this KeyServer checks in and says, hey, here's my list of programs. Do you have any new products for me based on that list? And then KeyServer will send some down. Now, every once in a while, for a newly installed program or product, you may not have it in the list. And so you can actually do a check of KeyServer. And if we go to tasks, we can use find product definitions to type in a name. You click OK, and a list of products that contain that string will be shown. You can select one or two or however many you want and import. I'm not going to step through that process at the moment. Another thing you may have noticed there under tasks is this check product definitions button. This does essentially what that schedule does, that 12 a.m. Check, except it does it whenever you decide to do it. So rather than waiting for the check, we can click there and have an instantly go and check and retrieve product definitions. Now, every once in a while, you might run into a situation where our product recognition service just doesn't have a product. Maybe it's a locally created tool that you want to create a definition for, or an obscure product for a very specific purpose that we haven't defined. And you do have the ability to create manual product definitions. I'm going to go ahead and let this check finish, because it's sending up that list and waiting back for a response. Sometimes this takes a few seconds or a minute or so. And looks like we are good to go. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this and say we're done. So if you have tried and not been able to find a product from our product recognition service, and you want to go ahead and create that manual product definition, the first step is to know what programs are included. And that may be something that you can do by performing a search in this programs window. You might do a little bit of research online or find out from the publisher what their installer installs, so that you get a complete list of programs and utilities that get installed. Once you've got an idea, usually they're grouped together here, or you can group them together by sorting by identifier. Once you've got an idea of the specific set of products or programs that are a part of a given product, and you're ready to begin that process of creating a new product, you can right-click and select new product within the programs window. You can also do the same from within the products window and walk through the wizard. I believe if we were to do that here, so no, this brings up the wizard as well. You give your product a name. We recommend sticking with the naming convention that we have set up within PRS, which is publisher name, product or program name, and then the version number. So you can see we've got 7-zip version 16 or Ableton Live Suite 9. You don't have to, you can name it whatever you want. But in general, we recommend sticking with the same naming convention so that you don't end up searching in the wrong place or getting confused when you go back to find it later. The wizard is pretty straightforward. Fields to fill out. When you get to the end, you'll have you can drag and drop your programs in. When you get to the end, you'll simply have a new product, manually defined product with that lighter colored icon. So again, a little bit more information here on the products window. You could see, similar to the others, we've got the status, the same kinds of options here. Referenced means that a product is referenced in either a purchase or a policy already. A unreferenced product means that it's been pulled in from PRS or been created manually, but it isn't currently set up in a policy or a purchase. Unreferenced products will show up in audit reports, but you're not going to see them in usage reports or many other reports. And then, of course, ignored products are completely ignored by the KeyServer. By default, web browsers, when they are brought into KeyServer, whether by PRS, discovered on the network, they're going to be default set to ignored. You can also drag and drop any program or product into the ignored status as well. Ignored products are not going to show up in audit reports, and they're not going to show up in usage reports either. So that's a way to sort of manually tell the KeyServer not to consider usage or audits of certain programs. Folders and filters are similar. They allow you to drill down to a specific product or group of products. Products can only be in one folder, whereas a filter is more general. You can set up a filter that will drill down to a product or a list of products, and then another filter that will drill down to a similar or overlapping list. Folders, you can only be in one folder at a time. Again, we could see whether it is Windows, Mac, or a multi-platform program, and we can customize the view of these columns, add additional columns to the view, and rearrange as we can with the computer's window and other windows within the KeyServer. And I think that covers everything we wanted to cover here in the products window. I did want to mention a couple of reports that are very useful as you move into configuring or reconfiguring your KeyServer. I may not run them all right now, but I wanted to point them out to you. Product-related reports. One is called Unmanaged Products, and that's under the audit option here. Unmanaged Products is the very last option. This one is good for when you're initially setting up, or every once in a while, you want to see if there's any new products that have shown up on the KeyServer on your network that are not being tracked or managed yet, don't have a policy set for them. If we go ahead and run this really quickly, we'll see these are all the products that are been discovered in audits. These are installed on the network. We can see how many are installed. We can actually sort by that. So if I sort, I can see Microsoft Office for Mac 2011 standard is on 283 computers on this network, but there's no policy tracking usage. There's nothing here letting me know what usage or compliance looks like for this product. So this is a good starting point. A couple of other products that are useful to keep in mind are product optimizations. And I think that one is here. Well, another one I was going to discuss is upgrade discoveries for both programs and products. If you are tracking a product, so say you're tracking Adobe Creative Cloud 2018, upgrade discoveries will show you newer versions of products that you are tracking. So it's similar to that unmanaged products report in that the results are products that are not currently managed, but it's a little bit more specific because it's only going to display new products, new versions of products that you are tracking. So products you're not tracking yet, but you probably want to. And then the other one is called, the other one on my list I wanted to show you is called Product Optimizations. This is a really interesting report that will show you, if I can remember where it is. Product Optimizations is all about comparing your entitlement to your usage. So it will give you recommendations if you have a product that is a very expensive version of a product, say Microsoft Office 365 Pro Plus, but only Word has ever been used on a given computer, then this report will tell you, you could probably get away with just here it is. So product optimizations will say, this computer's only ever run Word. You probably don't need this expensive version of Office on this computer. They kind of show you, compare usage to entitlements and other products that are available. So that's another one. In particular, if you're doing analysis of budget and you want to find ways to cut costs, those product optimization reports are useful. And then really quickly before we move on to policies, one other thing worth mentioning is back in relationship to that 6x logged product you may find in your KeyServer, but also any other manual product. Another report that's useful is under miscellaneous here called product suggestions. And what this report does is it will show you all of your manual products that now have standard definitions or have overlapping standard definitions. This KeyServer doesn't have anything to show here. If you see a lot and you're confused about the steps you might need to go through, reach out to us. You can email me directly, jason@sassafras.com. I'll be more than happy to hop on a TeamViewer call and we can step through what you need to do to clear that out. It's not necessary per se, but it is often helpful to stick with our manual definitions, and this product suggestions report is intended to help you convert manual definitions to standard product recognition definitions from us. They tend to be more accurate. They're the ones that are getting updated regularly, and we recommend working off of those whenever possible. Okay, so we're going to move to policies really quickly here. And so just quickly, what we're going to cover under policies, policy types are observe, manage, and deny. We'll talk about the different uses for each of those. Policy scope and user groups. Sections also comes into play here if you're using sections as a way to organize your computer divisions. And license metrics, the different types of entitlements that you can purchase from publishers. Purchase details will go into purchases a little bit again in the way that they relate to policies, and other options within the policy details window as well. So again, back to policies. Similar organization, tags, filters, and folders for policies. Policies are important within KeyServer because this is what we're going to use within the KeyServer to track usage, deny launch, or observe. It's just simply observe or manage launch as well. So a lot to cover here. This is another area where you may see a 6.x logged section. 6.x logged policy is a collection of what were not called policies at the time, but the prior version of KeyServer, the way that you were logging and tracking your programs. All of that may be rolled up together into a 6.x logged policy. Again, probably something you want to clear out or clean out one way or another. If these are all programs that you no longer need or aren't tracking, you can most likely delete them. Before you do that, you want to consider keyed programs. In the older versions of KeyServer, often what was done was that the executable file was modified so that it had to check in with KeyServer in order to run. And those keyed programs are not the ones that show up in our manual product definitions or standard product definitions. So if you are still running keyed programs out on your network, you want to be careful of that. So a couple of the things we can see within this policies details window or policies window. The blue icon represents a managed policy or a manage policy. And a manage policy is what you would tend to use for any software that you've purchased. We tend to recommend if you've purchased it, use a manage policy, even if you're not going to actively manage launch and denial of usage. It's an easy way to differentiate between what you've purchased and what's free. Even if your intention is just to observe, If you've purchased it, we recommend the manage, which is the blue icon. The yellow icon is observe only. Observe, you'll notice, doesn't have active tracking, so we can't see how many are actively in use. We can't see how many are waiting or what the limit is or how many have been issued. Observe, we tend to recommend for software that you haven't paid for, but maybe you want to track usage of browsers. If you do decide to track browsers, that's a common one to use there. And then red is a deny policy. Lots of reasons you might want to create deny policies. Network security is a big one. File sharing programs are common. In conjunction with a manage policy, we have seen usage of deny policies as well, because within the hierarchy of launch permission, manage policies will come first, and you can set the scope. So let's say you've got an art department, and that art department has access to Adobe Creative Suite or Creative Cloud. Only those computers should be using it. You want to create a policy to manage usage within that art department. You can create a policy scope that includes that art department, and then a deny policy that applies universally to everyone else. So that's another typical or common use for deny policies. And another time you might want to use manage policies is if you've got a software that has its own license manager. So you never want to prevent usage, but you do want to measure or track usage in ways that maybe the internal license manager doesn't allow you to. So you can use manage for that. I'm going to go into one of these policies now, and we'll take a look at the policy details window. To create a new policy, very straightforward, similar to the others. You can just right-click within this and select new policy. Probably better than that, though, would be to find the product that you want to create the policy for and right-click it and create a new policy directly, because then you've sort of skipped a step by automatically including that product and not having to drag and drop it in after the fact. But having a look at this policy details window here, again, we've got panes up top that we can select. I'm going to go through each one now and talk about what the different fields are for. The section has to do with over in your computer details, which is not up right now. Your computer details. So this east is a section, and if I wanted, I could drag that into here. And what that would essentially do is tell the policy that this applies to that section. Outside of that section, this policy just simply will not apply. So again, you might create a manage policy for a section that is allowed to use a product, and then deny usage elsewhere with a deny policy. So section is similar to scope in that it tells the policy what group of computers it applies to. Scope is different because it's based on groups of users or computers. And groups can be managed under Windows. You can go to groups and build out a computer group. You can create a new group, drag in computers or users, and now that will define a group of computers or users, and you can then bring that group in as the scope. And that again will tell the policy can only apply these rules that are set up in the policy to this group of users. Outside of that scope, the policy simply won't apply. You have the three actions here: manage, observe, and deny. We talked about what each of those are and how you might use them. So we'll come down to metric and see we've got a longer list here. Cite. There are a couple of reasons you might want to use cite as the metric for your policy. One, if you've got a site license for a given product. Obviously, if you've purchased site license, you can install Creative Cloud on every computer on your network. That's what you've purchased. That should be your metric here. Cite is also useful if you don't want to make any attempt to manage usage and you just want to observe. Track usage, make that product visible on lab maps, which we talked about previously. If you're setting up your lab maps, what you'll notice is that products are only visible if policies exist for them. So another common use of Cite is, I just want this to show up on the maps. You can select Cite. Concurrent use is for floating licenses, sometimes called a network license. This is less common these days, but if you have a license that says you can use this on any 50 computers at a given time, maybe you'll install it on 100. Concurrent use policy will allow you to track that and know if 50 are using it. When number 51 tries to launch that, they're going to be told that they've got to wait until the license becomes available. Lease is exactly that. If you've got a lease, that's typically going to come with a start and end date, subscription type thing. A user lease is a lease specific to a certain user. A user license, again, is a license that is tied to a specific user. You might use groups, once again, as a way to define who those users are and who that policy applies to. PVU and core have to do typically data center applications that have to do with the processing power of the machine that the software is running on. Core, socket, special, again, these tend to be more data center used. Node, I skipped over. A node license is a license that applies to a computer, a specific machine. So any user can use it, but it's tied to a specific machine. You'll have variations on these. These, you tend to see these in general, but depending on the specific license, you might choose one of these and then create a special variation. An example of that might be Bentley, very popular engineering software. They refer to their licensing as concurrent, but they have a very unique approach to the way usage is managed and tracked, based on 11-minute time increments. So you can use a lease license within KeyServer, and then set it up for a specific number of minutes, 10-minute increments, to track or manage usage of Bentley with their unique circumstances. So again, if you run into questions or a unique situation and you need assistance because it's not obvious what to select, always feel free to reach out to us. The goal in this call is to get you through 90% or so, recognizing that there are going to be unique circumstances, and we're here when those times arise. We talked about policy scope and sections. And so another option here that's good to look at is this auto assign. This is important because this says how are these licenses that you're setting up as a part of this policy going to be assigned to computers. You'll notice in this case usage is grayed out, but if I select node, usage is highlighted and selected, and I can unselect it and make changes here. So depending on the license metric type, that's going to determine whether you have these options available. And this just says, as a computer logs in, are we going to look at it just based on the fact that it's installed, in which case audit would be selected? Or does a user need to actually launch the software before we attempt to assign that license to a specific machine or user, depending on the metric selected? So you don't want to deselect both of these because you could end up in a situation where users start getting denied. You want to leave at least usage selected here, and just make sure that you define your groups if you want to narrow the scope of the policy. Define your user groups, define your section, so that your policy doesn't start denying people outside of the scope. unintentionally. Entitlement is just how many licenses do you have? What's the total number that you can have installed or running, depending on the license metric. Enforcement, relaxed, strict, or none. Again, if you just want to track usage, you're going to select none. If you do want to manage launch, you can select relaxed or strict. The only difference between relaxed and strict has to do with what happens to a program attempting to launch when the key server is on, or I'm sorry, when the computer is on or off the network. With strict enforcement, if you can't connect to the key server, you can't check in. And if you can't check in, you can't launch the program. Relaxed, if you're connected to the key server, the normal processes apply. If you're not connected to the key server, it's going to go ahead and allow that launch and not deny the launch. So depending on the product, the publisher, and compliance limitations, you might decide to run with relaxed, or you might decide we really want to make sure we don't ever go over and stick with strict. In the instance of strict, there are ways to allow a computer to leave the network and still use the license. There's a tool called Key Checkout. I didn't intend to go over today, but just so that you are aware, if you do have questions, if you've got a computer, it's on the network, it's got a product that's being managed with a strict license, and that user is taking their computer to a conference somewhere else in the country, and they're going to be off the network for a few days, you can essentially check out a license so that it's not available on the network and it's being taken with it, with that computer when it leaves the network. Information, these are fields that can be filled out that go along with purchase details. We can also see the number of users that are licensed and who they are based on usage or audit, which licenses have been assigned. This is a policy for a product, so we can also, of course, see the product name. Another common question that you're going to want to ask yourself when you're setting up a new policy is, do I want to create a policy for a specific product, variant, version, or do I want to just track usage and have all the different versions of a product in one policy? And again, that comes down to, are you attempting to manage strictly based on entitlements, or are you intending to observe usage? So in this case, this policy has one version of ADC Ultimate 9 for Windows. In a policy where, say, we have a site license for Adobe Creative Cloud with upgrade rights, and we can use any version, you might bring all versions of Creative Cloud into your Creative Cloud policy that's a setup for a site license so that it's all being tracked together. As you go through your key server, if you're going to go through and reconfigure or get things updated, create new policies, find out what you don't need, there are some policy reports that you can run to see how much usage a policy is getting. So if we come down to usage, we can look there as policy by division would be potentially a good one to run. If you're running some of these reports that are usage specific, you want to make sure you define a time frame, because if you run it across the entire data set and the key server's been up for years, it could take maybe an hour or more to compile all the data for report if you've run it on the entire data set. So make sure you restrict this to a reasonable time period based on what the information you're trying to gather. So if we say this month, we can have a look at some of the options here. These are the columns that will be visible and the order they'll be in. I can add, similar to some of the other fields, to see additional information in these reports. And then we can run this policy by division report just to see how much usage there has been. So under this Adobe Creative Cloud policy, we can collapse. We can see these are the policies that have some usage this month. And if we open one up, we can see all the computers, and we can drill down, see the total amount of time each policy has been used. per computer or by computer. The total count is the number of launches, the average amount of time a user spends per launch, and then the average count as well. We can also see when the policy was last used. And all this information flows into Key Reporter as well for some of the reporting that can be done there. Very quickly, we'll just come back in and wrap up on this window. Some of these options that are available within here, self-explanatory for the most part. There is an idle pane as well, and this has to do with if you've got a specific limit on the number of instances of a product that can run at a given time, or a user walks away from their computer and leaves a product open, how long do you want it to sit before forcing it to quit to free up that license? So you can use background idle settings here to give warnings and then ultimately force quit the software from the KeyServer. And I'm going to close out of here. So a lot going on here between programs leading into products, and then products being managed, observed, or denied launches based on policy information. Again, you can include one or multiple products within your policies. Many different ways to configure this, and hopefully all configuration circumstances are manageable within this system. And if you have questions on how to set something up, always feel free to reach out and ask. We're going to talk a little bit about purchases and the way that they relate. Purchases, again, were added to KeyServer as an option with the launch of 7.0. And at that time, similar to the way a manually created product was automatically made for all the programs you had previously been logging, and a manually created policy was created for your 6.x logged products. What you may have also seen, or what you may see, is a lot of what are called synthetic purchases automatically set up in your purchases window. And it may be that those are the only purchases in this window. The idea behind that was essentially placeholders. A synthetic purchase is one that is something that was automatically created during that. You can also create them yourself. And what it means is I don't have a PO in front of me. I don't have definite real information. I just know that at some point we purchased 50 copies of Creative Suite 6.0. So I'm going to create a synthetic purchase that represents that purchase, so that I'll show you the reconcile window here, so that the reconcile lines up and the number of entitlements I've purchased aligns with the number of copies I'm managing in my policy. So that's the idea behind a synthetic purchase. Maybe you've been purchasing a product for the last 15 or 20 years, and you don't want to pull in purchase records from all that time. Your very first purchase might be a synthetic one to represent your past purchases. And now in the future, you're going to enter in your real purchases going forward. So that's the idea behind a synthetic purchase within the KeyServer. A couple of other general things about purchases. Again, I don't want to dig too deeply, but they're designed to automate the process of tracking entitlements over time through many different purchases. Maybe you bought 2 or 3 copies of one product last year, and now you're buying 2 or 3 more this year, and you need to create a sum of those entitlements. By managing your purchases within KeyServer, all of that becomes relatively automated. You enter the information, and they will reconcile both with prior purchases as well as your policies. Maybe a new purchase is dependent. Maybe it's an upgrade that's dependent on a prior purchase. All that information can be entered into a new purchase as you walk through the process of creating one. Another common practice at the very beginning is to upload. If you've got a CSV file that contains 1,000 prior purchases or 20 or 100 prior purchases, you just want to get that data into your KeyServer as quickly as possible. All you got to do is drag that Excel or CSV file right into this purchases window from your desktop, and it will walk you through a wizard of mapping the fields, and you can upload that data right in to the KeyServer. And then in the future, a new purchase gets created, you would come in and manually enter that purchase data. The window organized similar to some of the others. If we go into purchase details for one of these purchases, we can see looks a lot like the policy. A lot of this information appears redundant. In some cases, it is redundant. If you've got one purchase that corresponds to one policy, then a lot of this information is going to be redundant. But if you've got 3 separate purchases for one product that's being managed by one policy, then maybe I purchased 5 entitlements today, 5 units today, 4 units in 2 weeks, and another couple of units down the road. That adds up to a total number of entitlements within your policy, but you can have separate purchase records that add up that way. So again, you've got your license metrics here, the dollar amount spent. A couple of reasons you might use purchases. One is just to have the records stored in the same place that you're managing and tracking usage. So you tie your entitlement purchased with your products that you are tracking and managing. And all this information can be stored on your KeyServer, and it can replace any other tracking tools that you may be using. Another use for purchases has to do with what we call license optimization. And there are a couple of reports within the KeyServer called under purchase called compliance reports. And these compliance reports will compare your entitlements to your usage in terms of dollars. If you're only using 30% of what you're entitled to from a policy standpoint, what does that represent in terms of how many dollars you spent on the licenses that you bought? How much money could you save if you're only using 30% and you reduced your next purchase? And reverse of that, if you're overusing, if you're using more than you're entitled to, what is your liability? How much more should you be spending on those licenses, or how much might you be exposed if the publisher decides to do an audit? So that's another good use for purchases. You can get an idea both here within Key Configure as well as within Key Reporter of some of that purchase information. So one thing we're going to look at here is within a purchase record, which is relatively self-explanatory in terms of data entry, there is something that may be a little hard to find. Under this summary tab and the rights and conditions pane, we can click this open and see this reconcile. And when we click reconcile, it's going to open this window. What reconcile is attempting to do is say, this is the number of units of a product that you've purchased over a given period of time, versus, however many purchases you've made. And if we select the product itself, we can see how many we're managing. In this case, these are reconciled properly. We're entitled to 2, we've purchased 2, and we're managing 2. Purchased, entitled, and managed. If we didn't have a policy for this product, then this would say 0, and we would have a recommendation here to create a policy. And we could then go right into the creation of that policy from the purchase record. The reason I go through all of this discussion is if you are going to use purchases, it's usually easier to start with purchases and move into your policy from there. Whereas if you're not going to create a purchase, or if you're going to do the purchase later, you can create your policy first and reconcile them in a backwards way. But if you're going to start with your purchase and then create your policy, you can bring a lot of that policy information right in automatically from the purchase in what would be down here. So this is reconcile which is accessed directly from within the purchase details using this reconcile button. If you want a more complete view of that reconcile for all of your purchases, you can right-click within the main purchases window and select reconcile here. And in sort of a report format, we're going to see all of the reconcile information that we've got. These are purchases that may or may not have policies set up. So here's one where we're entitled to 24, but we've got no policy set up. We're managing 0. And if we look up above here, Creative Cloud 2017, it looks like we're entitled to 41, we're managing 40, but there's some expirations that have passed. So you can get kind of an overview of what your entitlements look like compared to what you are tracking and managing with policies from within this window. This selection here will allow you to see all versus only the ones that are not properly fully reconciled. So that covers programs, products, policies, and purchases, which is what we wanted to cover today in this walkthrough. Some good reports if you want to write these down just to keep in mind under audit. You can run an audit computer by program or program by computer report for that raw program data that includes a tally of installations, how many are installed on your network. Otherwise, it's very similar to what the programs window is going to show you. The unmanaged products report is useful for tracking down software that maybe you should have a policy for. You can see what's out there on the network that's not currently being managed. Product optimizations, again, that's the one that tells you what you might be able to downgrade. You've got an expensive version of product, but when compared to usage, you may not need to be buying that more expensive version. Under miscellaneous, we talked about the product suggestions report, which will help you clean up and get rid of manually created products and swap them out for your standard definitions that come in from PRS. Upgrade discoveries will tell you for products that you are managing and tracking, what are new versions that are starting to show up on your network. People are downloading updates to software, and those updates aren't included in policies yet. Important reports to quickly track down those products that you want to add to policies or create new policies for. And again, under usage, a lot of these can be useful. Policy reports will show you usage based on the policy. So if you've got multiple products, you're going to see that all aggregated, or you can run usage reports on the products themselves. So if you're tracking Creative Cloud 2018, 2017, 2016 in one policy, do you want to see how many users are still using 2016? Maybe you'll run a policy report instead. And then, of course, program is going to allow you to break that down even further and see how much usage you've got of Illustrator versus Photoshop versus InDesign, so that you can sort of break it down as detailed as the program level. And I hope that this information has been helpful and you've got what you came for. As questions arise, again, we aim for 80–90% of your policy product-related questions to be answered here. You're going to have those instances where additional questions arise. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you guys for joining today.